Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
And instead of talking to you about incredible innovation and how we're going to deal with that, I'd basically like to talk to you about SharePoint architecture. Only joking. I had you for a minute, though. So listen, last 30 minutes, this is really, well, it's important for me. I actually kind of think it's important for you. So I have got a comedy job title, Chief Envisioning Officer. The reason we invented the job title is I work for a company you will well know in our day jobs. We love to talk to you about the technology and the products that we make. If you think about those in the context of what you've just seen, there's something missing. And the thing that's missing is the human beings that use those products. Because actually, none of this works if we can't wake up the human beings to the potential of what we're doing with technology and where we're going to go. So we created this position to try and show people that, to really focus what we think the future of human beings are going to do. The reason specifically for the job title is I kind of think of my job like it's about the future of humanity. And given I think it's about the future of humanity, I demand a job title with a certain degree of pomposity. I think you'll see I've achieved that. I told my mum when I was a kid, I said, Mum, one day I'm going to be CEO at Microsoft. You just watch me. You may be aware there was recently been a job opening for that position. This is still the only way I'm going to pull that off. My problem, right, I stand in front of you, an individual who dedicated my entire career to the world of IT, 20-odd years in the IT industry. I've chosen to work for one of the world's largest technology companies. I have gone to the extremes of personal grooming to grow a beard and a ponytail. That's how committed I am to my industry. And guess what? I quite like Star Trek. Right? Star Trek's really important, right, because it sets a backdrop. When you're a young, naive, gullible kid like what I was, Star Trek teaches you that technology is supposed to be a force for good in our society. It's supposed to be this transformational force that enables human beings to achieve more than they could do on their own. Now, my problem is, like you, I've got lots of experience in the IT industry. I look around at how we all use technology every single day, and I do not see that release. I see a prison. I see something that constrains how we work, controls how we think. And the biggest challenge we face, if you think about all of the incredible things we've seen today, is not whether the technology is going to work. It's whether the bloody human beings are going to want to aspire to do more with technology than they do today. The biggest challenge we face with technology is what my dad calls the interface between the keyboard and the chair. It's us, human beings, because it's our lack of aspiration for transformation that holds us back. It's our innate desire to want to replicate old ways of working with new technologies. Jamie's vision for interaction will come to nothing if we never switch from the keyboard, a design 143 years old, designed for another world. We have to do things differently, and this is my job, right? My job is to start helping you to think differently, to provoke questions in you. Last year I wrote a book called Business Reimagined, which was essentially just a provocation that said how we work today is not working. We cannot go on in a digital society simply replicating analog ways of work. The book this year is called The Rise of the Humans, and the story is all about data. It's about machine learning. You lucky people have all been given a free copy in your packs. That's how good we are. My publisher says thank you. I'm also a cheap date. You can get both of the copies for free online. But these stories, they're not answers. I used to be a consultant. I know better than to give you answers. This is the questions. This is a debate for you all to really think about what do we need to do to make this happen. But I want to tell you that second story because I think it frames quite nicely what you've heard today. Because it starts in this place I call the digital deluge, a world of too much information. We exist with too much information. Wherever we go, whatever we're doing, there is too much information. Thing is, though, we've kind of had that problem for a long time. I would argue that we've had too much information as a society since the invention of the printing press. Because at that moment in time, we had access as a society to more information than any single individual could consume in their lifetimes. The fact we have 10 times more or a bazillion times more today, it's kind of irrelevant. We've still got too much. But what makes it worse is these bloody things. These beautiful, engaging, lovely, connected mobile devices that we carry with us wherever we go, whatever we're doing. Because thanks to them, we now have too much information wherever we are, whatever we're doing. We will, from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed, be glued to one of these devices. We showed that the 58% of the average UK workforce will check this within 15 minutes of waking up. 52% of them will check it within 15 minutes of going to sleep. We fill in every nook and cranny of available time looking at this screen. And yet, this is where we are. We're still here. Technology frustrates us. A quick test. Who doesn't get enough email? Right, I haven't even got to write a punchline to that joke. We get the pain. But that's not what this is supposed to be, right? But I have this philosophy that everything we need to learn about the future, we can actually find out from our past. And it's based on that philosophy I would like to place all of the blame for our current problems with technology as a society with one single individual. It's a Scotsman. It's Alexander bloody Graham Bell. Right? It's his fault. He started it because he had a dream, right? He had an invention. In 1875, if you wanted to communicate across geographical distance, the only choice you had would be to engage into machine-to-machine communication. Yes, there was a human being involved, but all the human being did was to transcribe the message into a series of dots and dashes that then get shoved down a length of copper wire to another machine. His invention turned that into a human experience. He enabled human beings to engage in what they do naturally, to talk to each other, even though they were separated by vast geographical distances. Problem is, we didn't stop there, and we now live in this wonderful world where, thanks to these devices, I can pick this up, I can stand pretty much on any street corner in the world, and I can phone anywhere else in the world. But something interesting is starting to happen. A dark side is starting to emerge, because as good as technology is at connecting us when we're geographically separated, increasingly it's disconnecting us when we're not geographically separated, when we're in the same room, when we're sharing the same experience. It happens at work. How many of you work in an open plan office? How many of you sit at your desk in your open plan office emailing? Person sat next to you. What time are we going for lunch? I don't know. Where are we going to go? Bloody there, talk to them! Right? For those of you who have kids, you'll recognize this picture. Let me tell you about Coplin, family time in the Coplin household. We will say once in a while, you know what, wouldn't it be nice? Let us all sit down to dinner at the table together as a family, right? I sit down, my son sits down, my wife sits down. Within minutes, my work phone's out. My son brings out his nameless tablet device. Think about it. Wife gets out her phone. We sit in our own little digital bloody worlds. Nobody's talking to each other. We'll sit and watch a movie. And I guarantee you, when we watch a movie, 2 out of the 3 of us will be watching the little screen in our laps, not the big one in front of us. Technology is disconnecting us from each other, from the experience that we should share. It happens in real life. How many times do you go to some public event, a concert, New Year's Eve, Trafalgar Square, doesn't matter which, and you see it, right? You see hundreds, if not thousands of people enjoy that event from 4 inches behind a glowing rectangle. Just bizarre. I asked the bloke, why are you doing that? Is it all right? I've got an HD camera on my phone, right? And I'm like, yeah, so have I. It's called my eyes, right? Just strange. Anyway, what we have to remember for all of this stuff, and this is the key point, right? We're just the first generation of a digital society. We're still figuring out how this stuff works. We haven't figured out how it actually augments what we do. We just kind of drift into lots of different ways of using it. And my theory is the way we use it today is preventing us from actually getting it to where it should be, to a place where it lifts our capabilities. Because we've created a series of coping mechanisms that we think help, but actually cause the problem. I want to talk to you about 4 of them. The first one is this thing I call skimming, where we will, by choice, skim across the surface of the ocean of information without ever diving deep. You'll see this manifest itself in a number of different ways. Your boss may say this to you, may even do it to your team. You will send them an email that says, don't send me a long bloody email, summarize it in 2 or 3 bullets. If it can't be summarized in 2 or 3 bullets, I can't read it. Or have you ever sent an email and got the response, TLDR? Too long, didn't read. Right? This is a world without context. This is the same kind of world, you know, when you're doing that research project and you want to show off, so what do? Well, you go and use a search engine to find a quote that's pertinent from a book you've never read. Right? Brilliant. Search engines are fantastic for that. In all of those scenarios, what you have done is you have stripped away the context of why that information is relevant. What happens when you make decisions on no context or little context? You dramatically increase the risk of them being wrong. So this isn't to say that you shouldn't be precise, that brevity isn't good, but actually you understand what you throw away when all you do is skim on information. Now, skimming's supported by another coping mechanism, a coping mechanism I call snacking. And again, it's pretty much down to these devices, because thanks to these devices, I can snack on information whenever I want, any time of day. It's brilliant. We will fill in every nook and cranny of available time to look at a little screen. I work in London. We only have 5 floors in an office building near Victoria. I don't know anybody in my organisation that will travel less than 2 floors without checking their phone for email in the elevator. You see it every day in London on the tubes, on the escalator. It takes 45 seconds to go from top to bottom or bottom to top. Everyone's there glued to their email. Now, the thing is, that's kind of okay. But we're making those choices without being mindful about what it does to us, how it changes our relationship with the environment at that specific moment in time. I'll give you a personal example. I've got a son, he's 8 years old. I kind of like putting him to bed at night. And there's this little window of time between when he's in his pajamas and when he's actually in bed waiting for his story. And in that window of time, I'm completely redundant in the proceedings because he's in the bathroom cleaning his teeth. I've got a couple of minutes, right? So what do I do with a couple of minutes of time? Well, I do what any good working parent would do with 2 minutes of spare time. I put my hand in my pocket. I say, I'll just have a quick look, see what's going on at work. Oblivious to the fact that the minute I do that, something really important happens. Because the minute I look at my work email, mentally I'm no longer at home. I am now back at work. I am in the context of work. Now, best case, he gets into bed and he gets a story from a slightly distracted dad. Worst case, I get one of those emails, and we all get one of these emails from time to time, and this is an email from your boss or your colleagues or a customer that just sends you into a froth of rage. And if I get one of those emails, he can forget his bloody story because I'm off down. I'm going to fix this right now. The point is, we all, that felt good, by the way. We all have times in our lives when we need to be checking our phones, when the project is overrunning, when we're waiting for an important answer from the client. Maybe we work for the emergency services, I don't know. But my theory is that's not every night. That's not all the time. And we don't make a mindful choice about when we should be looking at our screens and when we shouldn't. We just drift into that usage without being mindful of what it's doing to us at that moment in time. So in all of this, you'll see this is about positive technology choices. The third coping mechanism is a thing about filters. This is about search engines and recommendation engines. And the only point here is you need to understand that increasingly those search engines and recommendation engines are showing you things that the algorithms think you would like. And that's great, right? We need their help. We would never knife and fork our way through a world of too much information without them being able to do that. But understand that when all we show you is stuff that we think you like, how do you ever find the things that you don't know you like? What is the opportunity for true discovery, true serendipity in a world that is ultimately predicted? So again, the trick with search engines and recommendation engines and filters in general, know when they can add value, know when they're going to hinder what you're trying to do. But the fourth and final coping mechanism, and there's one I want to talk to you about the most because it's the worst, it's the most dangerous, and it is the lie of multitasking. We are taught to be a successful individual in the 21st century, even as a male of the species, right? I should be able to multitask, right? That's my success will come right there. And the thing is, in doing that, we've completely forgotten that multitasking is not a human trait. Multitasking is a concept from computer science. It was invented in the mid-60s by a bunch of computer scientists in white lab coats who were trying to get central processing units to become more efficient. We've just adopted it as human beings. And what we don't realize, we've done research with other people, we've looked at other people's research, and we show consistently that the average human being, male or female, that whole thing is a myth, is a third less efficient when they multitask, a third less efficient. But it gets worse, because every time you switch contexts, every time you get distracted, you actually introduce a massive time delay between when you complete the distraction and when you get back to the work that you were doing before you were distracted. We did some experiments on our own people, because we're like that at Microsoft, and what we found was startling. We found that there is a chemical and cognitive process that prevents you from going back to the work that you were doing. Because the brain has a reward mechanism, where basically every time you do something that the brain feels contributes towards your future survival, you get a hit of a little hormone called dopamine. And the thing about dopamine is it's quite nice. And when you get one hit of dopamine, you'd quite like another one, thanks very much. And the challenge comes that the brain thinks you searching out more information, snacking on little tidbits from Twitter, checking your next email, looking at the next link, is more important for your survival than you actually sitting down and using the thing that lives between your ears. So what happens when you finish your distraction, rather than going back to where you were before you left, your brain basically says, hang on a minute, before you go back to the hard work, why don't you check your email out? Why don't you see what's going on Facebook? See what the footy scores are. And you will meander your way back to the work that you were doing. The average time delay from completion of the distraction to getting back to where you were is 23 minutes. Every distraction. So understand, this thing that we think is the savior of productivity makes us a third less efficient and introduces a massive time delay every time we get distracted. How long does this insanity have to go on before we start to realize there is a different approach we require for the world of work? The big problem in all of this is those 4 coping mechanisms all combine to leave us in, I think, quite a dangerous place. I worry for our society. I worry for a world of people who are glued, sleepwalking into using their technology every single day. As a society, we are losing the ability to think deeply. We don't do it anymore. Everybody exerts everybody else's opinion. If you want to know what people really think, they'll just tell you what they saw last on Facebook. They haven't thought about it because they're too busy looking at screens. And we need to turn this around. And the good news is it's actually dead easy to turn around because we've just got it the wrong way up. We're running around complaining that we live in a world of too much information. Oh man, there's just too much email, I can't find it, oh God, there's just too much. And then in the same breath, we'll tell you that your future success belongs to how well you use a world of too much information. So we're essentially complaining about having too much of the very raw material that will provide our future success. How stupid is that? That's like me walking around complaining I've either got too much money or too much chicken tikka, right? 2 things in my life I'm never going to have enough of. So let's just turn it around. Let's start to see this thing. We should see the deluge as a gift. If you look at all of the things that you've seen today, they are all fed by having access to more and more data, and not just big data sets, but lots of varied data sets. That's what makes a difference. We can do it with our customers. We can stop seeing our customers in a single dimension. Most organizations, they just think about the transaction that the customer is about to enact. They don't see the customer as a holistic whole human being. Human beings exhibit 10 to 12 different personalities every single day. You better figure out which is the primary personality of the customer before you're going to give them any decent service. I should understand who the customer's related to in social. That will change my view of them, will change my understanding of them. And so the point about the deluge when it comes to your customers is if you can lift up your eyes and you start to look to those data sets that are increasingly out there and start to connect them and pull them in and analyze them, you will think very differently about what your customers are, who they are, and what they want from you. You can do this with your employees as well. We've already heard so much today, and wonderful presentation earlier about what we can do with our inboxes. But this concept of unboxing your inbox is absolutely crucial. But don't wait for new tools to help you sort through the chaff. Ask yourselves, why are you communicating through email? Now, don't get me wrong, email's wonderful. I love email when it's used properly. But we don't use email properly today. We use it as a catch-all for everything. My inbox is full of information that has lots of value for my colleagues, but it's locked away in my inbox. Why is it in my inbox? It should be being shared elsewhere. What we're beginning to see is a very different culture of collaboration emerging. Individuals who have a personally rich experience of social media do great things with their friends and family over Facebook or Twitter on weekends. They realize that when you turn up somewhere and your first choice is to share information rather than to hold it back, wonderful things happen. And this is what we're seeing now, that culture starting to permeate inside organizations. These are worlds where knowledge used to be power, right? So people, their first choice was to share nothing. But if you can start to change your cultural approach to collaboration, you start to open things up, you start to behave more like a network. And the brilliant thing about behaving like a network is it's no longer about the individual success or the success of the individuals in your organizations. It's about the cumulative power of all of your people. You can engage with any node on that network and you will access the entire power of the organization. Underneath all of this and all of the stories you've heard today is the power of data. I'm not going to talk very long about this because we've spent so long, but I want you to think about this thing called a data dividend. You have access to your own data. You have access to other people's data. Again, lift up your eyes. Don't just look at that data and look down at your boots about how it's going to give you better insight to your customers or maybe make your I don't know why you need a Northwest accent to that, but it kind of just makes it feel good, you know? Or use that data to have better analysis on your process. You should be looking at that data and you should be looking for how is this data going to transform my business? Maybe there's new revenue models. Maybe there's new products that you could make. Maybe in conjunction with other people's data, there's a new service you could create. That's how you should be thinking about your data dividend. It is the future. It was talked about in terms of water before, but actually this is the fuel that will power our economy. It will power what we do as individuals. Data, the real point of data to me is actually not the data itself, it's the tools that we use it with. And if you've heard something today, I really hope you understand that it's machine learning is the thing that unlocks the potential of data. Machine learning is huge. Machine learning will change how we interact with computers. It will change our relationship with computers. I would argue it will take us to a place where it changes how we understand what it means to be human, because we will get such an insight from the data. Many of the old concepts that we have of being human will be brought into question. We've seen things like the real-time speech-to-speech language translation. These things are transformative. Think about the potential of that. Think about my 8-year-old son. Do I bother to get him to learn a foreign language at school? Because the reality is, when he reaches his world of work, it will be a redundant skill. Now, I get that's provocative. I get there are lots of reasons why you learn a foreign language. But it's one example of how transformational this kind of power that machine learning officers is. But if you want to understand the power of machine learning, you also have to understand some of its limitations. You have to understand how it works. And this is the best example I can think of for helping you understand what machine learning is and how it does. So there was an email that did the rounds back in 2003 based on some proper academic grown-up research from Cambridge University that showed as long as I keep the first and last characters in the same places, if you speak English, I can mix up all the rest of the characters and you'll still be able to read this. Is that true? Yeah? Perfect. Now the thing is, this is a bit counterintuitive to us because when we're kids at school, we're taught that language is logical. Language follows rules, right? Language follows rules like I before E, except after C. But what they don't tell you is that there are 923 exceptions to that rule. There are more bloody exceptions to that rule than there are to the rule itself. Language is not logical, right? It's not logical. It doesn't follow rules. It's a pattern. And what do you do as human beings? Well, you spend your life curating a pattern of language in your brains. And when the brain is presented with something like this slide, it calls upon that pattern and it uses that pattern to reassemble. Think about the statistical probability of what that word might be. That's how machine learning works. What do you think happens when I show this slide to someone who's just beginning to learn to speak English, or I show it to my son who's just forming his language skills? They can't bloody read it. They can't make sense of it because they haven't built that pattern. This is the limitation. So the stuff that we heard about the environment this afternoon, the stuff is only as good as the models, the patterns that they get provided with. And right back to what Andrew was talking about. Andrew hinted at, but never said, this lovely principle in robotics called Moravec's paradox, which is essentially what we think is really, really hard cognitive stuff, dead simple for computers and algorithms. But the stuff we take for granted and we think is really simple every single day, stuff we learn from when we're kids to, right to adults, is fine motor control, the ability to pick stuff up, throw around, not be able to squash stuff. It's really, really hard. And Moravec's paradox basically says, yes, you can create the world's best chess player, can't pick up the pieces, can't set up the board. These things are not yet possible and not going to be possible for some time to come. So that kind of boils down to me that, when we start talking about algorithms and robots, this is where most people go. This is a world where the algorithms answer our email and the robots do all the heavy lifting and we sit on our fat backsides and rejoice in all of the glory of the great stuff we've created. That's not my future at all. Because actually it's the human beings that need to create those patterns. The human beings are going to have to do a lot of the manual labor for the time being. The human beings are going to have to provide the context between the patterns and help them understand why they're relevant. But I wanted to give you some things that maybe are a bit more tangible for you to take away and think about. Things that you can think about either as individuals or as your organizations. Number one, I kind of think that we're all here because we want to deliver transformational experiences to our customers. And I want you to understand, you cannot do that. You cannot deliver a transformational experience to your customers unless you have two things, really crucial. In order to do this, number one, you need to have employees that are empowered to be transformational. You need an organizational culture that supports transformation in your people, from the bottom of the organization to the top. If you haven't got a culture that supports that, you will not do it. And secondly, those people, they need access to the tools that will enable them to be transformational. Tools that help them break free of email. Tools that help them create and share information, connect with other people, share and collaborate in a way that was never before possible. This is the only way you're going to do it. And if you can't get there, then actually give up now. And the rest of the world is going to pass us by if we don't. And what that means to most organizations, you've got to stop thinking about yourself in terms of an organization. Instead, you need to think about what a friend of mine calls intelligent organisms. Because organisms are brilliant. They evolve, they react, they're malleable, they respond to changes in their environment. Organizations don't. And we're heading into a really ambiguous future, really uncertain future. Nobody knows how it's going to play out. But one thing I will tell you for certain is you need an organization that's going to be able to respond and react to those changes quickly. And we're not going to do that based on the structure of the organization that we have today. For most organizations, that means thinking very differently about their people. Too many organizations, they think about their people in the specific domain of the skills they use to fulfill their job description. Well, think about yourselves in that context. You represent a far broader picture of skills and experiences than just those you use to fulfill your job description. I have a whole bunch of past experiences, bizarre stuff I do on the weekends. All of that has value to my organization if only they can find a way to tap into that. And when you tap into that, you work towards that organism that gives you the agility that you need. Fundamentally, a lot of it comes down to data. And if you want to be successful with data, you need to create what we call a data culture inside your organizations. This is crucial. At the moment, when we talk about data, most people's eyes glaze over and they think about the data scientists that they employ, and they think that data is a world for those guys. They can tell us all the answers and then we'll do smart stuff with it. Wrong. Where we're going, we've seen a lot of this today, is the tools that make data accessible are becoming closer and closer to normal human beings, people like us. It's a bit like, do you remember Microsoft Excel about 10 or 15 years ago when you needed to write a formula in Microsoft Excel? You needed like 7 manuals, a PhD in about 3 weeks. And if you were lucky, if you were really lucky, you might get the syntax right and it would work. What happens today? I click on a bloody button in the ribbon and it auto-completes for me. Tools like Power BI, Azure Machine Learning, are tools that are bringing the power of data closer and closer to regular, normal human beings, your employees. So we need to equip them with a kind of culture that makes them inquisitive, that makes them want to kick down the boundaries that exist between the finance department and the marketing department and the sales department, wants to have access to the data, wants to be able to stitch together disparate data sets to gain new insights. Because when you equip them with that culture, and then they get access to the tools, these are the people that are going to transform your business. They're going to transform what your organization is capable of. And then there are 2 things I want you to think about on a personal level. It's about your own relationship with technology. I'm not asking you to make any changes, I'm just asking you to think about it. The first thing is this thing called mindfulness, which I admit is a bit of a trendy topic at the moment. There are lots of people talking about mindfulness. But if you will just humor me, think of mindfulness as a spectrum. At one extreme is the West Coast US definition of mindfulness, where it's all about Zen Buddhism and meditation. Listen, I'm not knocking that, right? If that's your bag, that's cool. But what I really want you to think about is the other end of the spectrum. It's the British version of mindfulness, which is just being pragmatic. So if you are the sort of person that is sitting in a meeting with your laptop open, taking notes, or you're sitting in a meeting with other people with their laptops open, taking notes, and we all know that taking notes in a meeting basically means catching up on your email or checking out Facebook. Don't have the bloody meeting. It's a pointless waste of everybody's time. Don't be in the cafe or the pub with your friends and family checking out your Facebook feed. Pointless waste of everybody's time. The crucial skill to be successful in the 21st century is not multitasking. It's simply this. It's being able to make a positive, conscious choice about whether the technology can or cannot help what you are doing at that specific moment in time. Be really definite about it. If I pick up my phone now, is that going to help me in the things that I'm doing, yes or no? And if it's yes, fantastic, fill your boots. If it's no, put it down, leave it, put it away. Make that choice every single day, because that creates space for creativity. Creativity is hugely important. I would argue that I don't care who you are, what organization you work for, what role you have with that organization, there is room for creativity in your role. Creativity is the birthplace of innovation. It's where the great stuff comes from. But we've squashed creativity from our lives. We've pushed it out. And we push it out in a couple of domains. And I want to call those 2 places back. So first is about having a physical space for creativity. You cannot be creative as a human being in a busy, noisy, chaotic, open plan office. It does not happen. Can't happen. The brain is not wired to work in that way. They're great to collaborate. They're great to catch up with your workmates. They're great to share ideas. But when you have to be creative in yourself, to be thoughtful, to write the report, to create the new concept, you're not going to do it in your open plan office. So you either need to make sure you have access to a quiet space in your office, or better still, you need to be supported by an organizational culture that enables you to choose the best location for you to do the work you have to do, real, proper, flexible working. So you can choose to be working in a location that is conducive to you to be creative. The second dimension I want you to think about in terms of creativity is make the mental space for creativity. All of the stuff you've seen today is useless unless you can take some time to step back and think about how it might apply, how it might evolve. What would that mean to me? What would that mean to my organization? And you're not going to do that when you spend your lives snacking and binge feeding on the empty calories of all of the trivial bits of information we look at all the time. So you need to make sure that every single day you're taking some time away from technology to use the thing between your ears. And it might be when you take a shower, it might be going for a run, taking the dog for a walk. Doesn't matter when it is, but if you create that space and you do it consistently, I guarantee you your brain will surprise you at the kinds of ideas, the kind of evolution that it gives you based on what you've done. So this is not my future, right? This is not the Terminator. The internet, believe it or not, is not Skynet. I have a very different view of the future, and it's basically this. I see a future where we human beings rise up and stand high and tall, proud on the shoulders of the digital giants that we've created. We use technology to lift our capability as a society to do more than we could do on our own. It's a bit like the debate we had when I was a kid, right? So when I was a kid and I was doing my maths O-level, if you don't know what an O-level is, it's kind of like a GCSE but harder. And there was a point in our society where we were debating the role of the pocket calculator in the education of our children because they'd just become commercially affordable. Everybody could afford a pocket calculator. As a result of that societal debate, I did my Maths Buddy O-level with a logbook and a slide rule. Now let me tell you, I'm a better mathematician with a calculator than I am with a tabulated bit of paper and a slidey bit of plastic. Yes, I need to know the basics of arithmetic, but the technology lifts my capability as a human being. This is exactly the same debate we're having today. It really is. And so what we should be doing is what are the basic skills? And trust me, it's not things like learning about how to use Word or Office or any specific programming language, because I guarantee you, if my son gets taught those at school, there'll be redundant skills by the time he enters his world of work, because there'll be different tools. What he really needs is things like critical thinking, deep thinking, communication skills, collaboration skills, how to stay safe. All of these things, these are the basics. If we equip our society with these tools, with these capabilities, and we also have this aspiration to want more from technology, to use it to transform rather than do the same old stuff a bit better, then finally we will have the opportunity to rise up as human beings. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.